Welcome to the Crystal Cocoon. I'm Jessie, one of your hosts with Hannah Neal and Brandon. We have a fun show today. We wanted to talk with you guys about things like out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, astral traveling, astral projection, lucid dreaming. But before we get into that, we've actually started receiving some questions. So we wanted to start with a question, and this one came to us. Hannah Neal, do you want to read it?
Yes, this question was from Eric. It says, I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about Agartha and the inner hollow earth theory, and if any of you have ever been in contact with someone from Agartha or know someone who has. Thank you, Eric.
And Eric's all the way from Norway.
In Norway. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for asking.
So that was in our Crystal Cocoon group page.
On Facebook.
And Brandon did reply to it, but we wanted to definitely hit that topic on our show.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I replied to it that we would reply to it.
We would talk about it.
See, we're all on the same page here.
Exactly.
Well, one of the things that came up was, all of us have had various thoughts and researching and delving into research on the Hollow Earth over the years. Brandon's done a lot of research more recently on to prepare for this subject. Hannah Neal and I did some of what we're going to talk about today, some astro travel and some remote viewing of the area. But we're going to let Brandon start.
Okay, so there's a lot to think about when you think about the Hollow Earth theory. I think you got to think about it from two sides. One is the purely metaphysical and the esoteric. And so from that aspect, you have whistleblowers and you have secondhand accounts of people who say that they have some sort of experience of some sort of inner earth city. And then you have the account of that guy who flew into the Antarctic, is it?
Yeah, he went into the hole in the Antarctic.
Yeah, and that was a while ago. And then, so you have a bunch of different whistleblower types talking about something being down there. But from the scientific perspective, there's the majority of the scientific community would say that any kind of thoughts of a hollow earth is absolute rubbish. And so first I wanted to go into the skeptic side of things on why that would be so. And I think it's important to have both these perspectives. And then we'll wrap it up afterwards on kind of like how we can blend these two together to get a better idea of what might be going on. So one thing is that the tectonic plates and volcanic activity around the Earth, it tends to lay on a perimeter around these plates, indicating hot magma below. So if you think about hot magma being below, then how would there be any kind of hollow earth? Like, where is this coming from? It does indicate that there's something from below coming up to the surface. The other side of that is, like, the deeper you go into the earth, the higher pressure it gets and the hotter temperature it is. And I think it says that nearly 750,000 pounds per square inch, and then really high temperatures is what they get. It's like when it's some of the deepest depths they've reached to, and they've only been able to get down to I forget how deep it is. Let me see if I have it here. Oh yeah, it says they can only get down to 20 kilometers in the earth. They already have problems with heat and stuff once they get down that low. But what they also found is that some of the inner minerals and stuff, when they start bringing it up, due to the pressure change and stuff, everything starts to liquefy. Some of the deepest caves we have are only, the deepest cave we have is 7,208 feet, and it's about 50 degrees. So, definitely there's a level down below that it's plausible, but below that is where it really starts getting hot. So it kind of indicates that there is possibly something. And that cave that's at 7,000 feet also takes 29 days to get to the bottom. So it indicates a very long time to get from one end to the other on foot. It also indicates that there really is probably not very plausible being any kind of hollow earth, especially when you take into account all their material science that done examination using like radar and different equipment that's found a molten core made of mostly iron. So you have all these different aspects on the science end that says that probably not. The other side of that to think about is that there is vast caverns all around the world, and many of these caverns go really deep. So the only ones that we know about, the deepest is the Kruber Cave at 7,208 feet. That's the deepest one, and it only gets up to 50 degrees. So that's the plausible side of things. But as far as it being an actual hollow earth, that's where I don't think the accuracy is there. But when you take into account all the whistleblowers who's talking about underground bases and underground cities, you think about Dulce. That Dulce is
in New Mexico.
Which was a DUM. It's a deep underground military base, is what DUM stands for those of you who don't know. And what they said allegedly is that used to be an extraterrestrial habitat that was formerly encountered, and they just kind of took it over.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. And then there's different areas where people allegedly encounter people coming up from the earth. There is legends in the Native American communities and all around about people coming up from the earth in different areas, everything from ant people to places around Shasta. So Agartha, the Agartha legend itself really kind of paints this picture of this hollow earth, and that's where I think the fault in it lies. So I don't think that to be accurate. So what could possibly be happening in that experience that makes it appear like it is? The explorer who went inside the earth in that hole, he talked about having a whole ecosystem inside, and there being a second sun in the center of the earth. So this also ties into our show today on out-of-body experiences, because from what that traveler talked about, this is how he came to the conclusion that the earth was hollow. And another person I came across was talking about him having a astral body experience where he wanted to see the truth of the inner earth, and what he saw was a different ecosystem and a second sun made of plasma. And the ecosystem was made of these bacteria that kind of ate the minerals on the wall and illuminated, and so that's what kept everything lit up. And so thinking about this from like a science perspective, that could be entirely plausible, that the person who didn't have the science background to really interpret what he was looking at saw it as a second sun and a hollow earth, when in fact it might have been just a vast cavern with a second ecosystem. And thinking about a civilization that's possibly underground, thousands of years old, having plasma technology able to be static and present itself like a sun, is really quite plausible when you think about what Tesla did back when he was around, having ball lightning. So that's kind of my science perspective on everything that I've looked at and took notes on up to this point. The other side of things and plausibility go into all the different secondhand accounts of people having experiences about different cities around. So there's not just the Agartha, but there's also Telos. There's also allegedly there's some city underground in the Himalayas. So there's different legends of cities underground all around the world with different cultures. So it's not out of possibility that these really do exist. One such thing is about the Telos at Mount Shasta. I just came across somebody who was talking about they didn't believe it themselves, but then they came around a corner and they saw these doors there, and somebody came up to greet them saying that they were from Telos. I personally don't have any experience with any of the underground cities explicitly, but I can say that when I was at Telos, I had communicated with somebody there underground I felt them there, and they started showing me pictures, because at the time I was thinking about my stepfather's invention and how to make it different. So they were showing me pictures of how I can alter it and make it better. And then also read many accounts of people, and I talked to people who have been staying at places there, and all of a sudden it's like they hear machinery underground, and it's not constantly running, but like every now and then they'll hear machinery underground at different spots. So that's another interesting thing that happens.
And there's a lot of phenomenon recently of people hearing this machinery-like sound all around the planet. That's unexplainable. They call it the hum or the buzz.
Right. That's a little different, though,
right,
than the underground thing. But there is that.
Sorry. Yes, yeah, it is a little different. Also, I just wanted to mention the man who flew into the center of the Earth. His name was Admiral Richard Byrd.
Richard Byrd, that's right.
Byrd, and he was a pilot, and he said he just saw this great big hole over the Antarctic, and he flew into that, and he was missing for many weeks. And when he came back, he had all these stories of what he had seen down there while he was in there. There's a lot of research about him.
This was a topic in an area that I have not done a lot of research in. I didn't have a lot of information. In fact, I think I'd only ever heard the name Agartha maybe once or twice. I didn't really know what it was. So I just did some preliminary research and just fill in the missing gaps of what is this? What's the theory? That kind of thing. And the interesting part was I did something that I don't normally do, but is always easy, which is try to tap into it.
Energetically.
So I just asked my guides if it was for my highest good, that if Agartha exists, can I feel it? And it did actually feel a very resonant energy there. It's a lot of higher knowledge is stored there. In order to actually get there, though, I had to utilize more dragon energy, which is, for me, is a more multidimensional aspect of my energy. So that was another thing that we wanted to talk about, the idea that there is a possibility of multidimensions. We know physically we have some idea of what our physical existence looks like and the physicality of our Earth. But that does not mean that energetically there aren't other dimensions available to us.
And that kind of also correlates with the experiences of the UFOs and the ships around Shasta.
Yeah.
So Shasta's, you've got Talos, which is allegedly the underground city below Shasta, and you've got the ships that appear all around Shasta. And what they'll do is materialize, and they'll phase in and out. So with this phase shifting, what we talked about earlier, what Dr. Stephen Greer had mentioned it, and on many of his lectures, is it's really this dimensional shifting from one reality, one density into another that causes them to appear and disappear like in a second, in an instant. Sometimes very slowly, depending on what they're doing. Sometimes they're kind of 1 foot in the water, half in, half out, so you can kind of see through them.
The flickering.
Yeah, the flickering. So that's the other aspect that to think about when you're thinking about the possibility of these underground cities, the possibility of these other civilizations all around the world, and why some people see them and some people don't. Because there's also the fact that there is many experiences around the world with some people viewing a ship that seems to be right in front of them, plain as day, and then there's everybody around them who can't see the same thing. So some of that has to do with your openness to your own psychic sight. Your tuning, and then your ability to attune yourself to that other dimensional vibration. So that, I believe, is another thing going on in combination with everything else going on, to possibly some physical caverns as well as the interdimensional aspect of it.
Well, and there's even been, I'm going to look up while we're talking, there's even a woman reptilian who was interviewed. She came up out of, was that Sweden area?
Are you talking about Agartha?
Yeah. And she talks about living inside of the Earth, and that it's really a network of caverns and caves and connected regions under the planet, and how their entrances are guarded, and what happens when humans accidentally wander into the region, and the difference in the cultures based on that, and the views of those people below, and how strongly they protect that, so that they can maintain their independent life from the surface dwellers, which is another, fascinating way of looking at that whole concept of hollow Earth. Is it that we're hollow, or is it that we just have lots of pockets?
Right.
Yeah, it makes more sense scientifically, and both from the evidence presented, that there is many pockets.
Well, and if we look at how many sightings, how often the mountains are involved, and usually volcanic mountains. So there's tons of lava tubes with those. Most of the entrance points we know of are near volcanically active areas, or rather now inactive, but some active. Mount Adams is really popular next to St. Helens, right in that ring there, the region. And even the Himalayas, they're not a volcanic range, but they've been there for a really long time being driven up. So mountains really do seem to have something to do with it. We build our military bases a lot in mountains, like in Cheyenne, Wyoming? Yeah. So I think we've pretty much covered the question of hollow Earth. We can talk more about that as time goes on. We wanted to make sure we addressed that question. But moving forward to the show today, we wanted to talk about and we chose that question with this show because, as Hannah Neal mentioned, how she tapped into it, and I didn't do as much tapping in, but over the years I feel like I've always tried to energetically go, what is that? What is that? When I'm watching some documentary, is that real? And sometimes I just get nothing, and sometimes I get this shivery that makes me want to look more, but I haven't really done too much of that. But all of that is talking about remote viewing. How do we view things that are beyond us? How do we get out of our physical body and experience beyond that, which is, out of body experiences and astro travel, and they're all different names for very much the same experience in degrees of experiencing it.
Yeah, that's the same view that Eric Pepin has, is that their remote viewing, psychometry, and astral travel are all different degrees of the same experience. And from my experience too, it's like, sometimes when I'm viewing something, it's almost like this little tunnel opens up and this picture is in front of me. I'm like, it will move around depending on what I'm trying to look at. And other times it's like this whole scene comes forward to me, and it's like I'm embedding myself in that scene. And from my out-of-body experiences, it's kind of like I'm one place and then I'm another. And then there's like the bilocation experiences where you're actually in two places at once. So I've done that as well. And all these things are very similar. It's just a degree, intensity of focus that one has. And all this also plays a part into the dynamics of reality itself. And so when we talked about before in some of our other shows on the nature of reality, this is part of how I got to where I was thinking about it in the way I was, because I was tying in all these different experiences and the science behind it and how these pieces work together. Yeah,
exactly. Well, and for me, before I even understood energy work or had even heard the term energy worker or light worker, I was fascinated by aliens, and I was invited to work with a page on Facebook and be an admin on a page about aliens. And when she asked me, I was like, well, I don't know. I'm not sure that I have that much to contribute. And she's like, what are you talking about? Everything that all your comments and questions, it's like you're really in tune with them. You realize you're a medium. And I'm like, I don't know what do you mean? I'm not a medium. I don't know what you're talking about. And so she had told me that night to go home. I want you to go to bed tonight. And she said, do you have any labradorite? And I said, oh my God, that's my favorite stone. I've got tons of labradorite. And she said, well, I want you to sleep with some of it. And she gave me an exercise that she wanted me to do. And so I did the exercise. And that night I had this amazing dream where I was on this ship. And I remember I came into the ship and walking through this kind of corridor, and I could feel all these people around me, and it was like being in my team. It just felt really strong, this strong connection, and I felt them slap me on the back, and I was like wrestling with that. I mean, it was just, and where we were going, and we traveled along this corridor and opened into this big room, this big spherical light room that was just I could just feel it full of people. And they were all welcoming me home. And the sensation of it was so overwhelming. You guys can't see this, but Brandon is having some energetic responses to my story.
Yes.
The little twitching. And
for those of you who know me, whenever I have big energies coming through, it always makes me twitch and look like some convulsing person.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we usually go, what is that, Brandon?
Not a seizure.
But it was the sensation of being welcomed home was so overwhelming. I had never felt anything like that in my life before. For several nights after that, I dreamed of the ship and went there. And occasionally now, depending on what I'm doing, I will go back to there, and we go on missions, and it's this amazing experience. Well, that's basically an out-of-body experience, an astral projection. I didn't understand what that was at the time. But by having that focus, by having that exercise, and by having the support of the stone, I was able to shift my energy and come out of my body. There's lots of exercises that you can find online about how to access that part of your nature, that inherent part of all of our natures, to be able to lucid dream, and then take that beyond the next step to astral projection while sleeping. I think all of us have probably found different routes along that. Has that been your guys' experience?
It's so interesting. I don't really lucid dream. A lot of my waking reality feels like a dream. So a lot of things that, how I perceive reality is very dreamlike sometimes. I will look at something like a door, and I will all of a sudden see something very not door-like. I will see images, I will see faces, I will see a whole host of information coming through. And that's just how it happens sometimes for me. It's not like I'm purposely trying to do something, and just information's being released. So that's how things have always been different for me. When I was a child, I would do a lot more lucid dreaming, a lot more astral traveling. That was how I survived, I think, childhood, was having an outside world, literally, to be able to explore what I couldn't do in my physical body. Now, I only remember dreams if they're prophetic in nature, if I am being guided to remember something because it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So that's oftentimes now when I dream. I still visit people all the time in my dreams. I'm very active. I get a lot of people saying, oh, you came to my dream last night and you told me some wonderful information. I'm like, awesome. Yeah. I don't remember that, but I'm sure I did. And it's usually, I have something very comforting to tell people, or... my higher self is busy at work when I'm dreaming and when I'm sleeping.
I often get people tell me that I'll come to them and train them somehow.
Yeah, that too.
Training them somehow to do something.
Yes, that too.
Yeah.
Speaking of Eric in Norway, he and I were, I think, doing some Dreamtime work together. Our question asker, he was dreaming about snakes a lot. And I was like, oh, okay, and then I was like, oh, I had one of those energetic, I'm pretty sure we're doing work together. I can't tell you exactly what that is, but we're doing something. So that's how a lot of my dreams show up now, is very much in my waking reality.
I would agree. It's hard to kind of note, oh, wait, this is not how other people experience and walk through the world, because it is how I experience it. It's so natural.
Yeah, I saw a picture just this week. Somebody had taken a photograph and put it through it was like a dream generator. Oh. And it was this really cool photograph that had faces in it. It was just a picture of a donkey out in the middle of the desert. And if you looked at it, there were all these images embedded in the image itself. And I was like, that is the closest thing to how I perceive reality I've ever seen in this physical world. That's it. That's what my physical reality sometimes looks like. I'll look at something and it's a donkey, but it's so much more. And so that's a lot of times how I get a lot of my extraneous, I guess, or energetic information. At least these days.
Yeah, I started when I started lucid dreaming. Like I've had other clairvoyant dreams, like very vivid clairvoyant dreams as a child, and here and there, like there's a couple of them that really stand out. But I also used to have like these two in particular reoccurring nightmares, and that's how I started lucid dreaming, is when I realized, I'm like, hey, I'm having this dream again. This is that same nightmare. I know I'm dreaming. And I look down. So this dream was somebody following me down this long hallway. And there was these white doors like going forever with this like white and black checkered floor. And I would get down to the end of the hallway. And then I would hear these claws scrape on the walls and it's following me, getting faster and faster. And I'd get to the end of the wall and I would always wake up. Because one time I was like, wait a minute, I'm dreaming. And I looked down and then all of a sudden I had a katana in my hand. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. And then I turned around and chopped off his head.
Perfect.
And the other one is like, I remember too, around that same time, I had a dream about zombie apocalypse. And there was all these Please zombies.
Not a prophetic one.
No, I hope not. So all these zombies outside, and then I remember like people, like chaos and people like just going after each other, and I ran around this wall and I'm like, wait a minute, this is not real. This is ridiculous. I'm dreaming. How can this be better? And then I walked outside and there was my monster truck. And I got in the monster truck and it just started running over all these zombies. I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is cool.
Perfect. Just when you need one.
So that's really how I got my start in lucid dreaming. And now I find myself like kind of actively thinking through my dreams. It's not necessarily so much as a lucid dreaming. It's exploring whatever I'm going through in my dream. It's like, oh, well, if this is like this, we can do this, and da-da-da. Oh, let's change it like this. So I'm very interactive with my dreams, and it's usually working out whatever problem I seem to be looking at, like whatever storyline. Sometimes there are other times, too, that it seems like I'm involved in a whole other storyline other than my life.
Right.
And now those are the times that really make me wonder about like the dream aspect of what you're experiencing and the other strands and threads of our experience that many people believe that we have. And when you feel into it, it's these other expressions of ourselves. So on a soul level, we are much bigger than we perceive ourselves to be. Some people call these past lives. Some people call these like alternate lives, and there's these alternate timelines. And I think a little bit of that, the more aware you become, the more potential for bleed over that into your own existence in this life you have. And some of that comes through dreams. And some of the connectedness you have to these other places, it affects each aspect of the soul family when you go through your own healing. So when you heal, that other aspect of yourself heals. And sometimes I think this is how some of that appears in the dreams. So this is all tied in also, this lucid dreaming aspect, these other dynamics of self is also tied into the out-of-body experiences. This one time in particular, I met an alternate version of myself in another reality. And it was not something I was intending on doing. I was just like, okay, I'm gonna do some traveling tonight. So I set on my isochronic tones, which usually helps me get out of my body, you know. And I remember rolling out, and all of a sudden I was in this house. It was somewhere in Portland, but I was in this house. It was a light blue house. I remember, like multi-story, and I was in the attic. I didn't know where it was, but I felt somebody was looking for me. Or trying, I was like, I don't know if they're trying to get me. I feel like somebody's looking for me. It was this little girl's room in this attic. And so I started trying to lock all the doors and windows. And then all of a sudden this woman comes up the stairs. She's like, oh, there you are. And I looked at her. I'm like, huh? And she's like, oh, wait a minute. And she looked. She's like, wow. And then she called down the stairs. Hey, honey, come up here. And then I came up the stairs.
Oh.
And I came up the stairs, and it was it looked just like me, except it was more of a full goatee and long hair back in a ponytail. And then we walked over to each other, and both of us at the same time were like, whoa.
Totally.
And then we started looking like really close and examining our face, and like, and then we were just in awe of each other because we were seeing each other. And a lot of synchronicities around this time, around like parallel reality experiences that were information coming to me. So I knew I was meant to have this for a reason. It was really to like unveil the more dynamic truth of reality itself.
And to break the beliefs that you had that were inhibiting you from really accepting this truth.
Well, I was so open to experiencing these other things. And so it wasn't necessarily a hard belief. It was like a what if, like what's out there. And I think it was that openness that really brought it to me. So that's, I think, that's another key for all you explorers and experiences out there, is to really be open to having your reality shattered, really be opening to experiencing something different than you were taught to believe, and on the most basic concepts that you have ingrained in your own reality. Because when you really allow for that to be more fluid, you get to the deeper and larger truths. So the interesting part about this, other than just meeting myself, period, but was that right after we looked at each other, I was back in my body. And I was like, wow, that was really cool. I want to go back. And so I closed my eyes, and 5 minutes or less, I was back. And this time I was in this huge mansion type place in Hollywood somewhere. And I remember walking in the living room. There was like this white fireplace and like white stone walls, and it was really cool. And there I was again. And I was like, wow, you've done very well for yourself. And he's like, well, yeah, thank you. You know, he's like, I came up with this new modality and way to heal people. I'm like, oh, wow, that sounds very, very like me.
I'm working on that now, Martin.
And so we started talking back and forth. And he said, actually, the government was suing him for certain things. And I started giving him legal advice based on my understanding. He's like, yeah, that's very good advice. And then...
Why, Brandon, you're so knowledgeable about this. I'm so glad that you're giving me this information.
Oh, you are awesome. Why,
you're
thank
so
you.
Good.
So are you.
I know,
thank
you. I really like myself too right now.
So I came back to my body, and I was like, wow, that was really cool. I'm going to do that again. And then, bam, I was right there again. And this time it was this big, huge stadium.
Wow.
And it felt like it was some sort of national event. They were in a hurry, though, so they just kind of looked, and they saw, like, oh, there you are. And they passed around the corner and didn't look at me again. And I was, like, back in my body. I'm like, well, that was uneventful. So I went back again, and this is one of the most interesting things that I took away from it, is that when I went back again, like, I wasn't around, but other me's wife was. And she's like, you know, it's interesting. You look the same every time we see you. I'm like, well, it's only been 5 minutes between each time. And she's like, well, for us, it's been 5 years. So not only is there like this alternate experience happening, but the experience of time itself shifted dramatically. And from what we know about people who have contactee experiences, who's been in these ships, whistleblowers talking about their experience in the ships, this is exactly how travel in these other dimensions work, is that you move in a certain way, and it doesn't move the same way here as far as like relative time. You know, it's also the physics of relativity too, but it's moving through time dimensionally changes the experience of time itself.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of people who express that when they start to have an out-of-body experience, it's like time slows down. The shifting in the time shifts, and it slows down, and then everything is on a different timeline. Everything's happening in a different way.
Well, that's something Eric Pepin says too. Is like it can be actually the other way as well. So where
it speeds up.
You thought you had only like a 5 minute out of body experience, and it's really been 3 hours. then you can do it the other way where you think it's been this really long time and it's only been this really short time too.
Yeah.
So it can go either way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Anthony Peck is another author that I was listening to some interviews with, and he's written a lot of different books on the subject. And he started as a really mechanical reductionist kind of theory. It was where, he had that perspective of what so many scientists have of this world, that the whole energetic is this woohoo realm, and he just couldn't really believe it was real. So he really looked at it from the scientific perspective. And his conclusion after many years and lots of research was that, there is really something going on out there. His own personal theory is, and he's developed this through working with other people as well, is that we are all pieces of the God consciousness. And so we are each coming back and reliving, we are re-experiencing from every perspective. So you are me experiencing on a different timeline, and I am you experiencing in my own expression. And so that when we do an out of body or an astral projection experience, what we're really doing is going back into our God state and then coming back in and feeding back in through some other line of expression. Mm-hmm. And so that, and he also says that that's really what deja vu is God remembering his other existence, another time of living. And going through this experience, but from the other person's side, or from another side, or from the collective side, which was, I thought, very interesting way of looking at that. Different.
That's also related to the Law of One from
right.
the Seth books as well.
Right, exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He cites a lot of different researchers, like Ramachandran. He was talking about Ramachandran and how influential his work in understanding, pyramidal structure and things like that were in shaping how he viewed energy and how it related to our bodies. He wrote a book about Philip K. Dick. I don't know if you guys have heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
Never heard of that Dick.
Oh.
I have. But that's just me.
But it was fascinating listening to all of, from this, he gets really down to it. He's like, the microtubules in the brain are being impacted by the DMT that's being released by the pineal gland when you're having this experience. And, is that really for real? And he talked about near-death experiences and how that's really, is it the illusion? Is this a seizure in the brain that's creating the idea of this experience? And it wasn't until he started working with gurus and people who were really actively doing it that could go back in time, and then he could research and find documented evidence that they were telling him through their projections that they would have no way of knowing about people who had passed away or people's experiences that weren't really famous experiences, mm-hmm. but could be found and researched. And that really shifted it for him. And he went from being, very mechanicalistic about it to, I wish I could do that, which was great hearing somebody like that, saying, coming to that space.
That's a common skeptic approach to out-of-body experiences and astral travel is the association with the chemicals in the neurons in the brain and the release of DMT.
Yeah.
I remember having lengthy discussions with people I know about, is this just all in the head?
Right.
And there's so much out there as far as statistical evidence. And this is also where near-death experiences come into play, when the brain seems to be inactive and these people are having memories of being out of their body where they can account verbatim the conversations that relatives were having outside the hospital, mm-hmm. what they were doing,
right.
where they were positioned, what the people were wearing, and this person had been pronounced dead and they were trying to bring them back to life.
Yeah. Well, the book he wrote called A Life of Philip K. Dick, The Man Who Remembered the Future. Mm-hmm. That was, basically this guy, he had he was able to look forward and everything he was seeing in the future was beginning to come true, his predictions. And so, he wrote about him. He also did another book called Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die, where they've measured the weight of a soul. What they have had, people's bodies right as they're, they know they're going to pass, and they know what the soul weighs now. Mm-hmm. Fascinating.
Was it like 6 ounces or something?
I want to
20,
6 or 8?
It's 21 ounces or
Yeah.
20.
Oh, I thought it was way less than that.
I thought it was really light too. We'll have to look it up while
20,
we're talking.
it's 21 grams. I think that was.
That's what it sounds like. I don't think it was quite an
Grams.
ounce.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that was the. Well, there's been a lot of talk lately. There's been a lot more people who've been experiencing near-death experiences and writing about them. There was the neuroscientist who recently wrote a book, I want to say in the last couple of years, that was like a New York bestseller. And although I don't think that his opinion is entirely objective, although he is a neuroscientist, he does come off with some pretty heavy religious upbringing that probably influenced to some degree his experience, which, hey, perception is reality. But I liked the fact that he was a neuroscientist. So he had a lot of healthy skepticism about what actually happens in the brain during the death process. But then having experienced it personally, I think he had like meningitis and actually had a near-death experience that he remembered and could recollect. So pairing his own personal experience with that of his science background was a really interesting way of looking at things. He did have, like I said, also some religious overtones, but having that science background and a personal experience with a near-death situation was, and obviously his book has done incredibly well. It's a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, yeah. Another author I was listening to was William Baldwin, and he wrote. He wrote a lot of books. I'll come upon that in a second. But he's a hypnotherapist, and he's been for the last 30 years studying and doing out-of-body experiences. And I loved some of the things that he said. And one of the things he said is reality is relative to your vibrational density. So as you shift your density and where you're vibrating at, you're going to perceive your reality differently. Another thing that he said that he learned through his process was that we are all immortal beings evolving. And I loved that because it's so true. When we can recognize that what's inside of us is this immortal being that never really dies or goes away, that has its own consciousness, and we can step out of our body and re-experience that, we really know the truth of that. And we can bring that back into our bodies and change the way we relate to the world.
Adding on to that vibrational aspect of your experience and how you perceive reality, that's also correlated with out-of-body experiences.
Yeah.
So the more you advance your awareness and perceptions, the more dynamic your experience can get, the more access to the other realms you can get outside of your immediate one. And this is what Eric Pepin talks about. Robert Bruce is also a famous teacher of astral travel, and he talks about there's being different levels of reality that you can get to, and it's all depending on your vibrational component at the time. And not only that, from a more physical aspect, even Stephen Greer talks about your experiences with extraterrestrials being, and your ability to contact them being based on these different levels of your own conscious awareness, and what he talks about being like the cosmic awareness and the cosmic consciousness,
The collective consciousness.
and then the celestial awareness and consciousness, and then from there the God consciousness. And then each one of these different embodiments changes the way you interact and experience reality itself.
When I first started training, out-of-body experiences was for me one of the first things that really started happening and getting control over when I was working in my class, which the other students weren't having as much experience with. And so I would ask my teacher about it. And so at first I remember, really trying to have control over it. As a child, I would move a lot. I moved a lot. So I would have these dreams, these really vivid dreams of visiting my friends. And, I even had one where, my friend and I was laying in her bed, and she's like, she wakes up and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "I just missed you." And she was was like, oh, I missed you too. And we talked for a while, and she's like, I have to go to the bathroom. I'm like, don't go to the bathroom. I won't be able to stay if you go to the bathroom. She's like, I can't hold it anymore. I got to go. And she went to the bathroom, and I woke up, and it was 3:33 and I was on the East Coast when it happened. And so the next morning she called me, and, she said, I had the strangest dream last night. And I was like, really? Tell me about it. And it was the same dream. And she goes, and then I had to pee really bad, but you were gone. And it was so weird. It was like 1, 2, 3, 3 when I looked at the clock, which was 3 hours. She was 3 hours behind. And I just thought, oh, that's so funny. So I would have those kind of experiences, but they were very random. It wasn't with any intention. Mm-hmm. So when I first started waking up in my class, I was traveling around, and I would go to places that I'd been before. And it was, I would go down to the Pacific coastline, the California coastline, and some of my favorite places in Big Sur and Monterey. And then I was talking with a monk in Sri Lanka. We had kind of become friends, and he was teaching me a lot about, he was a Buddhist monk, and I'm Buddhist. I was raised Buddhist. So we were talking about theories and what's the difference being a Westerner raised in Buddhist culture versus a monk raised in Buddhist culture. And so one day I thought, well, I'm going to just try and go see him. And so I traveled there, and I totally saw the temple where he lived, and I described it to him, and he's like, oh my God, that's where I live, and he started sending me pictures, and it was the same place that I had seen. And then as my training progressed and my vibrational expression adjusted, I went there one time, and I traveled there, and I saw the temple space, but it was very different. It wasn't as substantive. It was much more the feeling, the vibrational expression, the energy of that temple was solid, and the physical was like less solid. And there were all these points of light, these little tiny points of light, and there was one big glowing light in the middle. And I just knew it was a class of children, and that they were meditating with him. So I sat down amongst them and joined the meditation, and I could just feel, all of the energy as they were moving and shifting with these different intentions and focuses as he was leading them. And then, I came back out of it, and then I, messaged him, and I said, so how was your day? And he said, oh, it was really good. I had a really powerful, Dharma classes today with my students. And I was like, so that was a Dharma class? And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, well, I was there. And he goes, I wondered. So in that way, I was able to not only experience it differently as I shifted and changed, but also get these confirmations of what I was experiencing from somebody outside of my whole world, my physical world here. And I think those confirmations are what really help us to anchor in and know, oh, I'm not crazy. When I travel.
This is really happening. Mm-hmm. This is really a part of my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't had as many experiences because I think for me, I had a lot of beliefs about distance and those kinds of things that I've only recently in the last year really shifted. And it's not that, again, I didn't know the truth. It's about believing it.
Mm-hmm.
So believing that distance really doesn't matter, that you can go anywhere, energy is not bound by time and space.
The speed of light.
Right. It doesn't have those kinds of limits that our physical self does. And so having a knowledge of something, but then believing it is quite different. Mm-hmm. So I've done a lot of expansion this year, on that particular area. So I'm hoping that I will have more experiences coming up. But it's interesting because I used to use remote viewing and I didn't really realize I was doing it. Mm-hmm. I used to have a house full of roommates. And as an introvert, I'm always like, all right, who's home? Who can I avoid? I just want to go to my room and be alone. Mm-hmm. So on my way home from work, I would remote view my house and see who's home, who's doing what, and where are they. Mm-hmm. And so I'd go home and they would be exactly where I saw them, doing exactly what I had seen them do. But that was, for me, I was really doing it with the intention of like, okay, I want to avoid people. Uh-huh. Not realizing that I was really remote viewing my house. I was going, I was looking, I was seeing, but I was doing it from a standpoint of not trying to do that. I was like protecting myself. But at the same time, once I realized that, I was like, oh, well, that's kind of a cool little trick. Mm-hmm. So there are just little things that sometimes we do naturally that we don't realize we're doing. That is just very much a part of this experience.
Exactly.
It's also important to keep that that playful curiosity about you.
Yeah.
Totally.
That childlike curiosity, and kind of like make a game out of it. Because I remember I'm like, I wonder if I can, what's at my house? Because I was like just getting into remote viewing, and I was like, oh, there's something red under my desk. That's weird. What is that? And I looked, and then I was like, oh, there's nothing red under my, wait a minute. What's behind this envelope? And I moved, and there was just like I think there was a red piece of paper or something underneath the the envelope. I was like, oh, there it is. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes too, I'll be talking to my mom, and she'll be like, "Where are you? Are you in the kitchen? Are you standing next to the window?" I'm like, "Well, why, yes." And she's like, "Oh, yeah, there was this bright spot that you were standing next to, and I felt like you were standing next to the stove." I'm like, "Yeah, that was me, standing next to the yep."
Well, and I think you bring up a good point, Hannah Neal, too, with that we don't know we're doing it. You know, there's so much that we aren't even really aware of what we're doing until we start training and going and putting an intention, a focus, putting a language around it. I was talking with an old friend of mine long ago when I was very young. We would lay there and we would try to visualize what people were doing, like what our friends were doing or boys that we liked, you know. And there was this one boy that she really liked. She always wanted to look at him and see what he was doing. And I'd be like, I don't know. I think he's in his boxers. I don't think we should look right now. And so later, many years later, just last summer, I saw her again for the first time in a long time. And we were talking, and I was telling her about kind of my own evolution and what I'm doing right now. And I said, I know it's probably kind of sounds far out. And she's like, what are you talking about? We were remote viewing when we were kids, remember? And I was like, oh, that's right. That's what that was. That was remote viewing. And we would be looking at all sorts of things.
I did that so much as a kid. You know, it was so funny. I used to read poems as a child. I had no idea what I was doing, but I would read poems. And so, like, you know, I would just tell people
poems. I thought you said poems. I'm like,
she said poems.
Yeah, no, read poems. Poems, like people's hands.
Yeah.
It's called reading, honey. You should try it.
It rhymes sometimes.
Do you need some extra assistance?
Yes. So there's a lot of those things that I would just do naturally, you know, reading people. I would say, I'm reading your poems, but I would just tell them the energy, you know, just read things in their energy.
Yeah.
You know, and you're talking about psychometry.
Psychometry.
Yeah. Which is the ability to like hold an object and get like a level of energy, be able to, you know, those kinds of things. That was another thing that I used to do. I still do a lot of, you know, people would bring me objects and I would, this belonged to your grandmother. Oh, she's got a sweet energy. Like, oh, she's so kind. I'm like, oh yeah, that was my grandma, you know, or just interesting things like that where you, I know a lot of empaths talk about not being able to buy antiques.
Right.
And not being able to go into like antique stores because of the resonant energy of the previous owners. And sometimes
just
the previous.
Change it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, they don't know how. That's right. That's
true.
the thing.
That is true.
Well, and
that's why we're here.
The previous owners are really attached to their objects, and you get grandma's ring at the antique store. It comes with grandma. So.
Well, you can change that too.
Absolutely, you can.
My wedding ring it's a setting from the late 1800s, and it when I first started wearing it, I used to just be really sad all the time, and I didn't like wearing it, but it was so pretty, and I was really drawn to it, and I remember that when there was this point in wearing it when I decided I was going to make this mine. And I didn't really know exactly what I was doing, but every time I would put it on, I'd make a statement of what this was, what it symbolized for me, what this, you know, that I will love, I will honor, and I will protect. I have 3 little rings that I wear. And by doing that, by setting that intention with that ring and filling it with my desire, my need, I was essentially shifting the energy of that ring. And now I don't have any of the previous owners' attachments to it or their family members, because it was an heirloom ring in their family. So we can change. You're right, Brandon. We can change the energy. We can shift it. We can release the attachment to it.
Sometimes helping whatever energy it is or being it is, let go.
Right, because those are serving as a physical anchor for that energy as well in their own expression, which is part of their lessons. But, you know, hey, we can all help each other.
So going back to the near-death experiences,
Right.
something I wanted to bring up is that how these near-death experiences all correlate to each other. What are the similarities and what are the differences? And how do these tie into out-of-body experiences, and how does it tie into one's own spirituality? And when you look at the cross-correlation of all the different experiences, looking at this one website I found as a really good place to go to do a little research is the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And one of the things that they said is the key factors is there's no one instance of one thing reoccurring through every experience. They all vary in some way. No one is the same. And just like you were talking about before, it seems to be that the person's consciousness, where they're at in their consciousness, is what dictates their experience in the near-death experience. And so, and the other thing that is interesting is it doesn't matter what religion the person is. Mm-hmm. They all will have a near-death experience, like no matter what type of religion. And sometimes even the very spiritual people will have a negative experience. Not necessarily spiritual, but religious people.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they'll have a
Those
negative
that talk
experience.
about hell or talk about the fear-based thoughts.
Or the void.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
being utterly alone in the void. And so they'll come back, and a lot of what happens after they get back from these near-death experiences, and this is the same thing that happens across the board, is what they say. Everybody becomes less religious and more spiritual.
Yes.
Everybody has this complete revamping of their view on the world. They become more empathic. They become more connected. They become more of a sense that their purpose is to help others somehow, help humanity somehow. They have this sense of service, and they suddenly find purpose in their life where they didn't before.
There's a great book, I don't know if you guys have read it, called The Afterlife of Billy Fingers, How My Bad Boy Brother Proved to me There's Life After Death. And it was written by Annie Kagan. And basically, her brother was a drug addict and essentially ended up homeless and died, died out on the street. And she was called, she lived in another part of the country and was called down to fetch his things, his few meager belongings, and she brought them back. And one of the last things he had given her was this red journal, and he'd told her, he dedicated it to her, and he'd said in the inscription that everyone in life should have at least one book dedicated to them. And so a few weeks after he had died, basically, he started coming to her in her dreams and talking to her at first in her dreams and then in her waking world. And at first she thought she was crazy, but he kept showing her this red journal. And what he wanted was her to start writing down what he was coming to her and saying. And so this book is basically his communications with her. I've seen a lot of quotes from the book on Facebook. But, one of the things that he talks about is when you die, you're released from this physical world and all the pain is gone. You're not in pain. You're not suffering anymore. Suddenly you remember all the truths, your connection to God. And he talked a lot about, being in this, he said it's like a tunnel. He describes it as being like a tunnel, but it's kind of more like a column of light that he traveled up into. And he described to her hearing the angels sing for the first time and just all the beauty of the world. And his real message to her was, quit making everything so hard and complicated. It doesn't have to be like that. Quit trying to suffer through your life. Just breathe, enjoy it. And a lot of the quotes that the people pull from it are along those lines. It's a great book.
And I think that's a perfect way to wrap up since we're about out of time.
Yeah, it is. So, thank you for joining us for this episode of The Crystal Cocoon. We'll have another show coming soon for you guys, and we're looking forward to hearing more questions and comments from you guys. You can leave those on The Crystal Cocoon on the Facebook, or you can email us at gmail.com as well.
Yeah, if you have some sort of personal thing to get a hold of us for, then feel free to go to the Gmail account and the Gmail and leave an email. But we would encourage you to leave your questions on the Facebook page so others can post their inputs as well and add to, and maybe even develop a whole show out of just one question, like we did almost a half a show.
Exactly.
Great question. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you for listening. And if you want to email us, our email address is TheCrystalCocoon@gmail.com. You can also find us on YouTube, iTunes, Facebook, Google+, and Tumblr at TheCrystalCocoon. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, we're Crystal_Cocoon_ on Twitter. Thank you very much.